Want to give Dustin his link so he can just join when he's okay. All right, it's loading up right now, guys. We got any moment here. Okay, guys, we got any moment here. All right, there we go. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the second diversity forum that we have via the Disc Golf Pro Tour. I'm joined by Steve Hill of the PDGA, Juan Garcia of Jomez Pro, and Zoe Andyke of UPlay Disc Golf. Thanks for joining me today, guys. I really appreciate having you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So we have started these, and I know I might be a little choppy. I'm up here in Clearwater, Minnesota, and we're working with a less than ideal service. So apologies on that front to all of our viewers at home. But you know, we're really excited to host these just to open up the discussion of diversity in disc golf, inclusion, race, and we did this about 3 weeks ago. We had our first diversity forum, and that focused on players. While Zoe is a player, she's also part of an organization and a business. And so we're going to talk a little bit more focused on the role of organizations and businesses in, you know, opening up accessibility, diversity in the sports, but also looking at what kind of opportunities are there for people of all races to kind of accelerate their professional careers as well in disc golf organizations, because as we know, it's not just players, there's a whole industry around it. So we're going to take the chance to examine that a little bit too. So with that, you know, I'm not a professional counselor. I'm not, you know, very super experienced in leading a forum, especially on a sensitive topic. So you know, we're all going to do our best to tackle a challenging topic. And, you know, in talking to and knowing all the folks in this forum, everybody's coming at it with the intention of, you know, understanding and compassion. And also, you know, this is framed by the murder of George Floyd, which happened not too far from here. About 40 minutes away from there, we've seen massive protests and, you know, kind of an outcrying for, just denunciation of racism across the world and really in the U.S. And, you know, as leaders in the sport, as people, you know, that are part of organizations, you know, we all want our, you know, voices to be heard to denounce racism, but also promote inclusion and look at how does this affect disc golf. So that being said, I think it's time for me to stop talking and allow some introductions. So we're going to hear, you know, from each person for a few minutes, just, you know, about their role, but also about their perspective in stepping into a forum like this. So I'm going to start with Steve Hill of the PDGA. And Steve, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And thank you to you and the Pro Tour. You guys have really taken the lead on a lot of this conversation, and I appreciate that. And at the PDGA, we appreciate that too. I'm the communications manager for the PDGA, so, you know, kind of front and center out there with various announcements and tracking our social media and writing articles and doing podcasts and everything like that. And I'm really happy that we're having this discussion. I think, you know, there could be an argument made that it's past time for us to kind of have this discussion in disc golf, but I think it's very important for us to be having it now, for us to kind of, you know, acknowledge where disc golf is in this regard. It is obviously, I think everyone would say that disc golf is by and large a very welcoming, inclusive sport, but that also doesn't mean that we can't aspire for more. And so I think that's why we're all here, and I'm really excited for us to just keep the conversation going and mostly just be able to listen. You know, it's important to listen and get everyone's ideas and perspective on all this. So I'm super stoked to be here, and I'm really happy to hear what Zoe and Juan have to say as well.
Great. And yeah, with that, I'm going to move on. Thanks for the introduction, Steve, to Juan. And Juan, if you want to do the same, introduce yourself and talk about your history with the game and perspective on these topics.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You guys really don't know, but I've been having these conversations with lots of people ever since I stepped on a disc golf course. So it has informed me and been a part of my mission with any entity or company that I work for to try to inject certain other ways of thinking. And for those of you watching that have no clue who I am, which is probably all of you, my very first assignment was to shoot Paul, Simon, and Eagle in their Disc Golf World Tour gear for their website. That was like, I come from a design background, and I reached out to UC and he liked my portfolio, and I just went straight to the top, So ever since my first assignment working with disc golf, I've been a part of, the biggest brands, and it's a extremely humbling experience for me to be able to contribute in that way. And I'm currently now, my title is kind of meaningless, but I'm a partner with Jonathan in Jomez Pro, and we have these conversations pretty much all the time in terms of what we can do better. And I think, Jeff, what you just said was, like, how does all this stuff affect disc golf? And I think our point of view, or especially mine, is kind of the opposite. It's more of, how can I affect disc golf? How can I bring change? What can I do? Because I grew up in a way that I was always criticizing and saying, oh, you guys can do this, you guys can do that. And as I've matured and had different opportunities, I've just realized that I need to point the finger at myself. So a lot of you might know, our social media account, and I've made tons of mistakes on there. And I listen to the feedback in terms of representing the sport and how people look at us in that representation. And, it's a big responsibility, but something that I'm really proud of to be a part of. So I'd rather say something dumb than not say anything at all. Because then if I don't say something dumb, then I'm not going to learn. So that's why I accepted this invitation, just to share my perspective. And I really like all of you. And, just a super quick thing, because I could just keep talking forever. But the biggest reason that I fell in love with disc golf and allowed it to overtake my life was when I found out Paul Macbeth had a Mexican heritage, and he was from Southern California. And, that affected me personally, because I'm from Southern California and my parents are Mexican. And, it was just like the only thing that I could grasp onto to identify with. And in terms of the professional, otherwise, like the recreational casual level, I would have just been playing a casual player, not interested to be involved in the industry. But when I learned one of the best players had a Mexican heritage, it really connected with me. So I look at those opportunities to keep growing the professional industry, and to be able to bring in more people, so that's pretty much it.
Thanks. Yeah, and we really appreciate you joining us, Juan. And I feel the same way, uncertain sometimes of how to approach it in my own perspective, but ready to say something dumb instead of not saying anything at all, and open the door, especially, with a platform. And could just say, before we move on to introducing Zoe, that I think it's very notable, the the images of diversity on, the Jomez social media account. We certainly, it's something we aspire to, but you do well, and good job, and thanks for being here. So, all right, and we're gonna move over and introduce Zoe. And one thing I want to say before we do is that I do know that we've got Dustin, and we will add Dustin in shortly, and also Dez Redding, who was also invited and got back and said that she can jump in. So I will add those folks shortly. And thanks for waiting on us, guys. But we'll just jump in here because we will lose Zoe a little early here, but I want to get some good time in with you before we do. So that being said, Zoe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for the folks at home who don't know maybe what you do besides being a player, and just your perspective on this topic?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Jeff, and the Pro Tour for getting this forum going. I kind of echoing Steve and Juan here. I feel incredibly honored to be a part of it, because I do feel like, I have a voice in our sport and in our game. And I also, I'm a pretty positive, motivating type of individual that likes to teach and likes to bring people together on how to get better, not just at disc golf, but lots of sports, and then do some life coaching. And this all kind of flows right into, for those of you at home that don't know who I am or what I do, Zoe Andyke is my name. And I have been playing professional disc golf. This would be my 9th year on tour, but I'm actually staying home this year. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I've been playing disc golf. This is my 16th year knowing how to play and being in the game. And right away, I come from a background of teaching, coaching, and education. And so like my first year in the game as an amateur, I saw a direct need for coaching in the game and growing the skill levels, which quickly developed into youth and children in the game. And then as I turned pro and played a lot more tournaments, I saw a huge deficit for the women's numbers in the game, being, kind of like 8% or less of the population, a lot of the times less in a lot of the tournaments or the events that I was joining. And so the combination of my drive to teach, my athletic background and physical educator, needing and wanting to see more women and kids even understand what the game were, brought me into a position in 2017. I decided to start, I founded a nonprofit called Universal Play Disc Golf. And just in the way that I kind of had to mature and grow and see all of the sides of the game that I wanted to help and I wanted to be a part of, our mission statement for the nonprofit started with introducing disc golf into schools, because I thought that would be the fastest way to bring children into the game. And we quickly evolved into schools, camps, any kind of tournament settings, club settings, community settings to teach clinics. And then with this recent COVID timing, at the beginning of COVID, before a lot of the discussion about this forum tonight, I actually had to adopt not just having the mission statement aimed at children, but to women as well. And although it was already there with some of our roots, one of our board of directors is Valerie Das, and she's huge advocating for the women's game. Also one of our main ambassadors being Paige Pierce, and kind of, I would say, one of the most highlighted female player in the game. It made obvious sense that we should be expanding to the women's side of the game. And when it comes to diversity, I want to kind of echo what Juan said a little bit, and even Steve. These are not new conversations for me to be having at all. Actually, right after I started playing disc golf and really didn't even know what tournaments were, I was wondering, I was bringing up or listening to that question being drawn about diversity in disc golf. I live in Oregon. I'm an Oregon native, born and raised. And it wasn't until experiencing being on the tour, on the professional tour, that I realized that we have a major, white population competing in the sport. But I don't think that there's anything that would hold fact or would hold cloud in the idea of why, except for the fact that disc golf has only been around for a much shorter amount of time than most mainstream sports. And when you look at only being around for 6 or 7 decades and how it started, the Frisbee culture, it's kind of obvious as to how grassroots and small and not exploited it was within one group. Well, now we've evolved to a time where we have media, we have, all of the efforts of the Disc Golf Pro Tour, the PDGA, the pros themselves, social media. We now are in our very first time period where we can actually introduce disc golf anywhere and everywhere. And I don't believe that we are at a time period as unique and as accessible as we are right now. And so I guess that was a lot of, who am I, but also what my background is and what my professional skill sets are. And my complete mission and life's aim already is directed at the growth of the game. I'm completely all obsessed, all enthralled, and all in on disc golf. And so when you consider all those factors, and then that teaching and inserting the game in as many places as possible, these are actually pretty familiar conversations. And I feel, again, like I don't have a lot of topic discussions on race or like this forum, and I'm excited to discuss and give it a chance. I'm a public speaker, and this is a great way for me to expand, take all the things we can learn and talk about today and insert them into the times that I do public speaking and teaching. So thanks again. And I'm really happy to be here. I do actually have to cut out because I run 4 different women's leagues safely in 4 different places around the state of Oregon. So I'll be cutting out to do that tonight.
Well, we got some backup for you, Zoe, and thanks for that. And we'll be bringing them in right after this next bit. So, we can bump you out at that time. But before you go, I think the one topic I think that's really prescient right now with you here is just like identifying the unseen barriers. That was a topic that kind of where we ended last time, and talking to the players that were on that call, we started getting a little bit of a better sense that there were barriers. A lot of comments from folks that maybe were critical of us, even just broaching a topic about diversity. A lot said, hey, there aren't barriers. People can just go get a disc. It's very cheap. People can go to a local course. It's free. There's, mostly welcoming people out there. But my question to the group then was, what are we not seeing? Because it doesn't reflect necessarily the mix of society. And we know disc golf, is not necessarily more fun for white males, which makes up the main part of the population. So I guess I'll just go in reverse there and start with Zoe. Like, from your experience teaching, like, are you seeing, kids that, we were at the Memorial and taught 450 kids. From that level, there's not necessarily more excitement based on race, at least from what I've seen. And do you see any barriers that come out of those like teaching sessions with young kids that maybe we wouldn't recognize normally?
Well, okay, that was a good question. And I want to say, first of all, for those of you that weren't super aware, that the Pro Tour does have a community connection program, and that in February in Arizona, we were able to link up with a much lower income and socioeconomically type status, just minutes away from one of the Pro Tour courses. And the 75% of the population of that school was Latino, actually. And white children were a little more of the minority. And I want to speak to the fact that it has zero to do with race when we're teaching disc golf. All of those kids picked it up just as quick, if not quicker. I like to throw in stats about how young girls pick it up quicker than young boys, which is kind of cute. However, we all know that young boys are potentially a little more athletic in different strength ways, but we're talking about boys and girls, not race. And again, I have to totally echo what I said. We chose a school that wouldn't normally get that attention. So when we have more public figures or leaders or professionals in the game of disc golf, choosing an area that there's just absolutely no way somebody else is inserting disc golf, it's a win-win-win and nobody can lose. There's no barriers in education, and there's certainly no barriers with children. They just need the opportunity. And I think that that's what a lot of the studies and the facts and the things I see right now all over the world about this topic, you will find statistics on how a lot of white children have every opportunity from birth on, and other populations may not have that. And so I would encourage our speakers, our educators, our professional figures in the game, if and when you have a bit give back program or something that you're donating to grant, I know the PDGA has tons of different awesome grants that they're pouring into making sure disc golf gets somewhere. It's the people in charge of where these dollars are being allocated to pick the most under-resourced, most unopportune settings, because there's certainly no barriers for children's learning. They all have so much fun. And I would like to encourage the Pro Tour to roll back some of that footage from February, because you're going to see those kids smashing putts and drives. And that's what we want to see. Just giving more opportunity for disc golf out there.
Yeah, if I could
Awesome.
Add a little to
Jump in, Juan.
Zoe. Okay, great. So just how Zoe's saying, like, we have to allocate resources to certain things, and those decisions come from leaders. If you don't have people of color in leadership roles, then it makes it more challenging to connect with a specific demographic, in the sense that, in the sense of authenticity. Because now, if we're just looking at who is this, or like who checks all these boxes, it's easy for anyone to pick that. But if you have a leader that comes from that community, they can speak to them directly and authentically. And I think that's a major challenge that pretty much every industry in the world is facing. So if you want to talk about allocating resources, I think that goes hand in hand with what is the racial makeup of companies, especially within leadership roles.
Can I jump in on something with that too?
Absolutely, keep going.
Thank you. I mean, Juan, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm very thankful that we have people like you and Jonathan, and on the Pro Tour side, Mahmoud, in leadership roles, because you guys have a very important, influential platform, and being able to have you guys in those leadership roles, I hope people realize how invaluable that is. I'll be the first to admit, when when everything happened with George Floyd and the beginning of this most recent round of protests, I was totally following all of it. I was paying attention to the news. I was personally like getting enraged and everything like that. But I didn't take that and immediately think, how can I translate this into disc golf? And I'm not exactly sure why, to be perfectly frank. I may have just been too wrapped up in what was going on to even think about disc golf, or what. Or it could be my own personal biases or just having being more insulated from something like that. I don't know. But what I do know is the first two people to connect with me personally about what some steps from the PDGA might be were Juan and Mahmoud. And I'm so incredibly grateful for both of them for doing that because, on the one hand, yes, we want to get to a point where they shouldn't have to do that and connect with us and see what's going on. We should be spurring that action ourselves. But for them to be in that leadership role and use their platforms and use that role and spur others to action is just I'm incredibly grateful for it. So Juan, I wanted to thank you, and obviously Jeff, hopefully Mo is watching, but just it's really important. It kind of circles back to what Juan was saying about how what connected with him was seeing Paul Macbeth and sharing, a background and a culture. And, it's just what we kind of talk about all the time with wanting to get more women to play the sport. We want to put women in those situations where they can be seen more. We also want to do that with people of color. And so I think there's opportunities there that we can really start to build on and develop if we all keep working together and taking that feedback from each other.
And I'm just going to cut right in off that. Communication is 100% what I wouldn't say it's not like there's a lack thereof or any kind of blame or push. Like Steve said, this is new. This is something that needs our attention. It's not new, but this is something that needs a lot of attention and has been brought to a lot of people's attention that weren't thinking about it very clearly or focused before. And so for media teams, the pros, the PDGA, our sanctioning body, the Pro Tour team, for us all to be in good communication, that's how ideas, it's called collective impact. And that's how ideas actually happen faster and more worldwide. And collective impact means Juan's got a good idea. He shares it with Steve. Steve's got a good idea, shares it with the team over here in Oregon, over there in Japan, over there in Australia. We all can take each other's ideas that are good and expand off of it with good communication and address these things. But we have to collectively come together to do it just like this.
And I think it also kind of comes back to putting aside some of that fear of maybe saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing and being okay with making mistakes. Because for a lot of people, for most people in a lot of this, or at least a lot of white people, I think, speaking for my own self, this is something that takes learning. And there are some people who are going to be scared to kind of step out of that comfort zone or acknowledge that there is some learning that can happen. And sometimes you just got to look at the greater good and put that fear aside. And, if you maybe embarrass yourself or step in it somehow, then you're going to find out and people are going to teach you. And that's part of like the human experience. And it's also kind of a recognition of, that we have that opportunity to learn and taking advantage of that and trying to, again, just use it to connect with other people on a more human level and just try and create some good from that, even if you do mess up.
For sure. And Zoe, before we lose you, I just wanted to give you one more opportunity. I know you're stepping away here, and we're going to bring in Dustin, another part of UPlay, and Dez, who is the educational director for the PDGA. And looking forward to hearing from both of them here in a minute. But, thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for teaching, so many kids and dedicating your life to teaching. Any thoughts on the way out?
Oh yeah, I'm off mute. Okay. I've got a couple of things. I feel I feel like what Steve just said was really brave and really important, because a lot of us are uncomfortable and trying to become comfortable, and then there's a lot of people that don't want to step out of their comfort zone, and that's okay. But we have to realize that things don't just take care of themselves. We all have to like work a little harder to take care of worldwide issues. And this is in the world of disc golf. This is a very worldwide issue that we want to address. So it really is about understanding that it takes a little bit of effort, actually quite a bit. It takes a little bit of work hard, and it takes being brave. If we can all remember to go back to the basic rules of just respect and treat other people how you want to be treated, I think those of us that are uncomfortable or nervous to get berated at people tearing down our opinions, remember that you have your own opinions and so does everyone else, but nothing happens if nobody's doing anything. So it's better that something be done. You get a little uncomfortable, maybe you get attacked, but if people can just keep in mind, respect, treat other people how you want to be treated, and nothing goes away on its own, I think we're really going to be getting somewhere. The basic rules have to be applied, and the loudest voices and the biggest professionals have got to be brave. And those of you that aren't ready to be brave, I want to encourage you to support the ones that are ready to be brave. And maybe we can help light a torch or lead a path for just the few of us that are going for it and that are giving it a try. And I want to, before I sign out, I want to encourage anybody that's viewing this, no matter what level of disc golf you're in, to reach out to your leaders if you don't think your voice can get heard. Chances are an email or a PM or a DM will get to a pro or somebody on this forum right now. And maybe some of your opinions, if they're great or your ideas are great, could be tested to a larger scale. So maybe I want to invite the public to be brave with the pros. And I know Dustin's going to talk just a tiny bit maybe about some of the policies that our nonprofit UPlay has had in place, but is more focused on now. Kind of like Juan said, it really is about having some diverse people in leadership roles to teach some of us that don't know or that wouldn't have thought of it naturally. And some of the policies that UPlay adopted are they're very good practice for any organization, no matter the topic or the subject matter that they're in. It's professionally how you'd probably want to build an organization, but then it's diversity policies that, as long as you have them written in your bylaws or your articles, since they're there, you should follow them. And so maybe for the professionals, I would recommend, if you're not sure where to start, maybe check out some of your own literature or own things that your own mission stands behind. You might find in there somewhere a way to empower yourself, or actually a way that you want to behave inside of your organization, just to uphold what's good for your company, and it will help you in this way. So back to the basics, and policies are in place for a reason, and I encourage everyone to reach out, find your bravery, or find somebody to help you be brave. And it was kind of a lot, and I'm sorry to cut out so early, but again, I know Dustin has a couple things to say, and I wish I were going to be able to listen to Dez. She's one of my total heroes in the game, major mentor to many more than just women in the game and children. Dez is a legend for a reason, and everyone on this forum has great ideas. Let's keep the collective impact going. I'm here for it. I'm here to help.
There we are, Zoe.
Hey.
Well said. I was sitting there listening to you. Now I was glad we didn't tap out at the exact same time, because we are adding a little bit of that women's diversity here. If we would have just substituted each other, we'd been back that same old percentage we deal with all the time.
Good job, Des.
Good job.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, we're happy to
Thank you,
welcome
Zoe.
in Des and Dustin here as we lose Zoe, and we just wanted to get. I know everybody gets going, and so we wanted to have Zoe be able to kind of say a few things before we lost her. But I appreciate you guys joining us, Des and Dustin, and Zoe. Thank you again. All right, so I want to kind of pick up and like when we throw it over to Des and Dustin, please take the time to give us your background too. But the one thing that kind of the topic that has kind of been circulating here is just seeing different types of people in positions of power, in organizations where they have leadership roles, that whether they're in the administration or whether you're leading now the educational wing of the PDGA desk. Juan and Jonathan are leading the sport's biggest media company. We didn't invite some other leaders of color in the disc golf industry too. But I think the other topic that I wanted to touch on, and I'll hear from you guys. Take whatever you want from this and run with it, Des, because you're up next. But is not necessarily like, and Mo and I have been talking about this, but not necessarily looking to necessarily people of color for the answers here, or women for the answers on how to grow the game, like taking some responsibility, as the majority in the sport, to say, well, what are my ideas? What can I do? Why is it the responsibility of women to necessarily have the answers for how to grow a women's game? Why is it the responsibility of people of color or Black people to have the answers for how to grow that inclusion? So that's an interesting topic that Mahmoud and I have been talking about, and it's also kind of something we've circulated on. It's like, just because someone is Black in the game, do we have to look to them? Or just because someone is a woman, do we have to look to them to answer the questions? And Mo made it very clear. He's like, just because someone's a person of color doesn't, you need white people in the room too, to like share their perspectives and look for answers as well. So, those are the kind of the topics there that we're circulating on. But Des, if you can introduce yourself and give your perspective on kind of some of these topics, we'd appreciate it. And thank you for joining.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the invite also, and the panel that decided to join us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dez Redding. I have been in the sports since, I started in college. I was actually introduced by my Hispanic friends. So I might be one of those unique opportunity, that here I am, a woman that was introduced to the sport by a minority in 1993. So, farther back. 93. Yeah, 93. So I joined the PDGA in 1999. There's not a lot of women. My personal history, I have won 3 women's open world titles, a master world title. I've got numerous player of the years, other achievements that also go along with that, spirit of the award games that are very important as you transition from just enjoying your sport to remember to always have spirit of the game, because that is what disc golf, ultimate, and frisbee sports are really about. And then now I originally founded the Educational Disc Golf Experience in 2002. We have created, at that point in time, there were very limited opportunities for disc golf into schools. The EDGE team has made a 3rd through 12th grade national standardized curriculum that actually showcases for the lead characters, and 2 are women. One is a white boy, another is a Black boy. So, back in even 2002, Edge on a team made sure that diversity was at least represented as best as we could. And then we also reached out to Muffy Davis, who was a Paralympic skier at that point in time, and she wrote an adaptive section for that curriculum in itself. And last year, beginning in April 1st, I joined the PDGA as the Youth and Education Director for a newly formed position for the PDGA. So the PDGA has taken, its time to create that position, but I cannot say that there was an actual void for them to fill. Edge was working with schools. They're well into thousands of schools. UPlay is going on. So the PDGA took, and I'm speaking right now just as myself, I had to find that fine line. Here's my PDGA hat. So when we start talking about PDGA, we'll put that one on. So that was my back history. So I guess I will say the PDGA now. So now I'm talking about what we're working on right now in the youth and education. And we're kind of just with COVID getting back and going. I was one of the furloughed employees. So just like schools, I was on hiatus, but it doesn't mean that disc golf is on hiatus. We've seen a big surge in recreational play from manufacturers saying that they're selling a lot of discs, from stores selling a lot of discs. The Pro Tour, I watched the coverage last weekend. It was fantastic. I was glad to see that it was the most heavily watched broadcast, CBS Sports. So now is our time to look to how we're going to capture all these new players, because diversity is out there. What you guys have all been alluding to, and is how do you keep impacting a diverse group? And it is a difficult thing because disc golf takes up a lot of space, and space equals usually white affluent areas. And so to get disc golf into an inner school, a Title I school, which is when I was working with Edge, that's where all the PDGA grant monies, all the additional monies that were generated from that nonprofit would go to Title I, which basically means it has the lowest impact of students for federally funded dollars. So we're trying to make that most impact, because some of the affluent schools will have functioning PTAs that they can derive their money from. So that is where disc golf has always had a little bit of a problem, you know, to reach minority players because of space. It's a very difficult thing to try to work within. And that space is a big issue. Space is a big issue to overcome. And then when you really look at expendable dollars that different demographics have, I think the last census, African Americans maybe averaged around $38,000, where white Americans were around $62,000. With savings was even worse than that. I think it was like $19,000. You know, and with our tournaments becoming heavily priced, it outsources a lot of expendable income to continually fund minorities, to be inclusive in the sport. Yes, we can all come and play recreationally, but we're all really involved in the PDGA and the tournament scene. And so I feel like that is what is being brought to the forefront, you know, like how do we bring people into our folds? You know, because I do believe that they're out there if the park is available in their neighborhood. So then it comes back to continually putting in small courses. You know, for every championship course that we put in, we should really be diligent to put in 2 small 9-hole courses in smaller areas so the families around there can be impacted and they get exposed to the disc golf scene. And one more thing on that, when I was getting ready to do this, I quickly put in just disc golf images, and it took me 100 images before I actually got to who was Swami, who was part of the PDGA's representation on the new commercial. It wasn't even for that, it was for an Army article he did, but it was 100 images down. So we do need to be more, like Philo had said last week, or I'm not even sure, like last month, sorry about that, diligent on you.
A couple weeks.
Provide pictures. My wind chimes are going to go off. They must.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a beautiful Texas evening there. Yes. Yeah, but no, I mean, you brought up a couple points about barriers. I mean, in space, in terms of like, you know, access to parks, access to disc golf courses. And again, you know, a very important thing that we talked about, which is just, you know, Juan mentioned it before, you know, seeing someone of like you playing, you know, that example. So, you know, Dustin, any thoughts on that? And, you know, as Zoe's partnered there or on the board of UPlay, thanks for jumping in when she jumped out. Tell us about
for me as a woman, just to quickly address that, I know I had to get better, and I learned it as I got, I wasn't so heavily into my sports. When I was playing at the USDGC, they wanted to run feature articles of me being the woman in the, you know, all one division. And that is insulting, you know, because you're just like, I had qualified on my own regards. At one time I qualified against the men. I'm there as a player. And so we struggle with being a player. I heard Rebecca and the other, you know, other board panels saying the same thing. I just want to be recognized as players. And so I did not embrace my womanhood as much as I should have, and knew and realized that this article is showcasing and could have an impact on younger women. Instead, I kind of took it more internally and said like, again, it's just because I'm a woman, you're highlighting this. And so we all have to learn. I needed to learn that. And I've found myself better at letting the ego aside and knowing some of these things that men are doing, or white men, or whatever, just the people who are writing the playbook are not trying to be insulting. They might be trying to be on the good side, and I think the Pro Tour has done a good job of that. I think you are highlighting the women appropriately now with the 4 o'clock tee time more than the 8 o'clock tee time. I think it gives more opportunities to stick around and watch some holes than it is to tune in the morning. So I think that's a good start. You tried different things, and I feel like that's a better fit to not impede play. Back in the day when we were trying to find a nice fit for women, they were stuffing our lead group of women in between maybe the second and the third card of the men, which I balked at because it's not in the spirit of competition. Why should our group be stuck right there between the other divisions that are in a heated competition? Just that little bit of different diversity of play is going to impact another division. So, we're making progress. It's making progress in learning. We all have to learn a lot of different things. I've needed to learn how to handle just being a woman and not being insulted for that at times.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a tough challenge to deal with in terms of figuring out how to ask to be someone else to be represented, like as a white male, like in the majority of participation in the sport, and wanting to like show images of diversity and include, Black players, people of color, women, it is, you want to do it, but you want to do it with sensitivity and respect and tact. So, the more we can talk about that, the more we can understand it and probably do it in a way that works for, the diverse amount of people that we do have in the game. And, that's something that I want to, and I'll let Dustin jump in on this one. Dustin, if you can hear me, just the differences between what's represented in the pro game versus the actual representation of people that play disc golf. I've heard through, even after the first one, perhaps there's more diversity casually playing disc golf than we see represented in the pro game. Dustin, tell us about yourself, and if you jump in on that topic, that'd be great.
Yeah. I believe disc golf is way more diverse than the pro game, to be honest. Traveling around the country, you kind of have to be a little privileged is a word for that. You have to have support from all sorts of people, all sorts of companies, and to make it happen, you got to have means to do it. And it's just harder, for minorities, basically. And, so as I grew up in disc golf, it was like, I'm from Oregon. It's a pretty white state, to be honest. And, there wasn't a lot of representation when I first got into the game. And based on that is why we wanted to focus so much on the kids, because kids don't really see color until people tell them to, and they learn properly. All kids, no matter race, learn disc golf quickly, and they love it every time. And so in my opinion, like, we need to build role models as the pros to have kids and new players have things to look up to, and more voices from the top players in the game. And just because a lot of the top players are white doesn't mean they aren't trying to grow the game and for all other minorities and everything. So, you know, just building the story. Like, kids like to follow people, so they fall in love with their superstars, their favorite players, regardless of race. And, you know, they want something to follow. And, you know, that's why I think the Pro Tour is doing really well on is building player profiles and like showing the world who we are. We're not just white people driving around the country playing disc golf. Like, we all come from different areas. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different passions and beliefs. And however, we all want people to pick up a Frisbee and throw it, you know, like we all want disc golf to shine through anything, first and foremost. So just, you know, for us to change, you know, diversity in disc golf, we really need to start from the bottom. Like, you're not, like Dez says, space is a really big issue. You know, most minorities live in cities, to be honest, and there's not a lot of disc golf in big cities throughout the country. Like, you know, even if you go into the city and teach them, you know, they'll learn it for the week and they love it. What says they're gonna have the means to drive an hour out to the country to play that course? So, you know, building these little 9-hole courses, giving schools a basket, giving schools an opportunity to show what disc golf is and how fun it is and how accessible it is and how, you know, easy it is to learn at the start, but really complicated to become a pro. So it's like finding the waves, just like every other sport, where you find the passion, and then you have the people to look up to that you want to be like, or you want, you know, as an athlete growing up, it didn't matter what my favorite players looked like. It was their results on their sporting event that I looked up to. So I don't know, I think starting at the bottom is what we really, really need to focus on. And that's, you know, what Zoe and I and Dez and Jay have really dedicated to, starting from the bottom to just showcase what disc golf is and how much we all need it, really, you know.
I think that's really important, Dustin. Your perspective, and obviously all the great work that you're doing with Zoe and everyone on your team, having that perspective of exposing children to the sport. But I don't think this is like a single approach kind of a solution. Having people like Dez that understand and have evolved their own perspective, you know, as she was saying early in her career, or before she was offended, but now she realizes different things. And, you know, all of that evolution, I think, is extremely important. And we kind of need a 360 approach to this. You know, it has to come from the top, it has to come from the side, it has to come from the bottom, just like Zoe said before she left. You know, one good decision is going to inform another good decision. And one of the biggest things that popped out at me right now was that I didn't just realize, but as you guys were saying, my disc golf, my like different groups of disc golf that I've played with in different cities that I've lived in, is truly the most diverse group of friends I've ever had. You know, old, young, every color, every profession, and you just step on a disc golf course and you're amongst friends. So like that's all amazing, except for the fact that now we're realizing that there's all these amazing casual players, but there is a huge barrier between casual and professional. And I don't remember if Dez said it or Dustin, but the people making the decisions to sponsor certain players and give them the support. I think it was you, Dustin, that said, you know, like, you need a lot of resources to hit the road, you know, because there's very little money to be made on the tournament side. And just from my personal experience, flying to a tournament is extremely expensive. So now, you know, players are like getting RVs or, you know, the little trucks or whatever. So where and why, or more why hasn't that support from manufacturers and other entities in disc golf trickled down to this extremely diverse group of casual play? And obviously there's the other side too, that maybe they're just not interested in competing in the sport professionally. But I just thought that was a pretty interesting thing when I realized my group of friends, it's like, dude, we're all extremely diverse, but then when you watch coverage on YouTube, it's like the same, 20 pros on coverage most of the time, and they all kind of look the same or have the same, demographic statistics. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I. Oh. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, this is kind of getting back into the topic of seeing, the people at the professional level. Philo did bring that up last time, and he was talking about, just general money in the game. Like, there's not necessarily, he said, that bag to go after. And, if there was maybe more compelling, reasons, but they kind of brought up an underlying issue there, a barrier that I didn't know until I heard Philo talk about it, which was like he worries about, or, people in the Black community that he was, raised in and seeing, was like, they don't want to make a mistake. If they make one mistake, there's not necessarily a safety net there. And he kind of explained that, if you have a safety net, maybe you'll just take a chance and go out on tour. But without one, as kind of Juan mentioned, from maybe a sponsor, if you don't have it like in your family, or, something to fall back on, you're not going to take that chance and hit the road. And I think we've seen from just the start of the Disc Golf Pro Tour in the last 5 years, like, people can come out of anywhere. And we've seen people that were no names, and all of a sudden they were really talented at this sport, and all of a sudden they break through. And I mean, I'm thinking about James Conrad, for instance. No one knew James, and all of a sudden he's playing these Pro Tour events and breaking out. He's taking a chance to do that. Are those same chances available or even appetizing to, people of color? That's what, kind of came to mind for me.
I think part of it too, Jeff, is just.
So,
Oh, sorry, Dustin, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
No, Steve, say your piece first while you had it fresh on your mind.
Oh, no, you're fine, man. I part of it too is having those conversations with Philo. I mean, I've been doing disc golf media for off and on probably 8-9 years now, and I've thought several times about how, Philo is one of the only Black players on tour, and I've always been a little bit hesitant to immediately go to him, kind of like what Jeff was talking about, he and Mo talk about, of just immediately going to Philo or Rebecca as the representative for people of color. But at the same time, I will also say I never actually reached out to see if Philo was comfortable with that. I just stuck with my own assumptions, thinking that, oh man, this might not be comfortable. He might not be willing to talk about that stuff, or doesn't want to be the representative, or does want to. And I spun my wheels about it too much instead of just actually talking to him. And so it's about having those conversations. And, I finally did speak with him about this, honestly, like 2 weeks ago, which is borderline embarrassing on my part for how many times I've talked to him over the years and what my role is. And, he is comfortable with having those conversations. He came on this forum last time and was willing to do that. And so again, it kind of just takes, people who are in leadership roles, stepping out of their comfort zone, because man, like, we have to. That's all it comes down to. Like, we can't just rely on being comfortable all the time and let that get in the way of us trying to make progress in that regard. You never know unless you ask. And so that's kind of part of that. Juan was talking about it from the 360 degree view, which I love. Part of it is talking to people like Philo, and then part of it is pounding the pavement, telling the stories of those groups of casual friends who are playing, who maybe represent a more diverse group, and putting those groups and those players on a platform like the Disc Golf Pro Tour or PDGA or Jomez social media channels, and letting people know, hey, there are these groups of people out there. We're finding them. We're gonna show you these people, and then we just have to do the work to kind of get that going. So, Dustin, I'll jump back to you, man. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your. We had the typical Zoom lag. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no biggie. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's like we're taught as white people that it's like uncomfortable to talk about race, whereas like minorities don't really feel the same way when you bring it up, and I just think we need these kind of discussions that we can have extremely open and just, nobody's against anybody or trying to overstep boundaries or be insensitive, and we're just talking. And we need more of this. We need more people knowing that this is an issue and that we're not just trying to brush it aside, and as a sport, taking a stand and expanding on that, and just speaking how we really feel about it. Just because there aren't a lot of diversity in the pro level of disc golf doesn't mean there can't be, and doesn't mean there won't be soon, as soon as we just expose it and realize that this isn't just the white man sport. Like, we're not golf. We are different. We're still a niche sport. We're still young. We're still have time and space to carve our own pathway and show people that this sport's super inclusive. Like Juan was saying, like, the minute you step on a course, you're friends with every single person on the entire course, even if you've never met them before, and it doesn't matter. You just share the love of disc golf. And so it's a very inviting, friendly place for all cultures to be. And we just need to enforce that and tell people that, like, this isn't, you're not walking onto a country club collar, gotta look nice. Like, everybody's welcome. And if you can throw, you can play. Like, it's pretty much that simple. And I don't know why there isn't more, to be honest. And that's why we're having these discussions. And I just think we need to expand to where diversity is, which is where courses aren't, sadly. And we need to expand into exposing disc golf in big cities, in boys and girls clubs, in YMCAs, in like the places where diversity resides and like resonates. So
yeah, you addressed two things there, Dustin. One being, one of the unseen barriers, because there's two things that I see in the comments and hear from people is, number one, there's no barriers, and we know that there are a few barriers, so you address that. But number two, I've been hearing, it's not a problem, like, to have lower percentages of Black people playing, of people of color playing, of women playing. Like, we can't, you can't make minorities or women or people play. And so I just wonder what the group says to that, because I know I'm not seeing the comments right now, but I'm sure that there's somebody mentioning this, and I've seen it before. It's like, hey, you know, like stop creating a problem when there isn't one, is something that I, you know, I wonder what you think about. I want to kind of go to Dez on that and get the perspective, because you've been in it probably looking at like 8 to 10% women's participation for a while. And, you know, what is the response to something like that? Hey, it's not a problem. Women can play if they want to, you know?
That is a completely true statement. I mean, women can play if they want to. And I would say, as a woman who loves women and have been around women, and a sporty woman, I am a crafty woman. I sew, I do a whole lot of things. And I can say for myself, sometimes I don't want to play disc golf. And women in particular, we have a nice, unique opportunity when we were raised that we can be sporty, we can be, you know, girly. You know, there's so many opportunities. Men are pretty well, you know, led into a sporty kind of macho way of being. And so it is a easier vehicle to become a sports participant, because you are kind of raised on that. And I remember reading some of the comments on the first forum also, like, you guys are making something out of nothing. And to the point, I understand where they're coming from, because disc golf is, you know, it's inclusionary. You know, we all can go and pick up that disc. You know, I went to the grocery store, that it was a gas station, and picked up my $10 Cobra at the time and went out and threw it, you know, and took responsibility for myself. I feel like what the Disc Golf Pro Tour is trying to do is, you're not creating a problem, you're seeing an opportunity to bring more people into the scene. And I think that's how we really need to approach this. We know disc golf is inclusionary. Everyone can play. You can play with all sorts of abilities in race, and you know, it's actually in the PDGA, you know, bylaws. The diversity is part of their bylaws. You know, you can access it. It's always been. So I think a few things that Dustin said, I agreed with. A few things, I think it was just like that, making the problem out of nothing, are worded, you know, just differently. It is accessing. If we want to bring more diversity into the sport, then we do need to go, like I had said, to those spatially problematic areas. And that does come down to boys and girls clubs. It also comes down to camps, because on the East Coast, lots of kids go to summer camps. So, you know, as the PDGA Youth Education Director, I would like to see, you know, us kind of getting into camps also. And then going along with that, the people that design those courses, you know, we need to have some different T lanes for different levels of play. It's frustrating to go and play a gold level course if you are, she said, I don't even remember all the colors. Green, I think, might have been like the least one at one point in time. So I think when we're addressing these situations, it's not a problem. It's a solution that we're looking to bring to ourselves. You know, we're in a unique opportunity when, with COVID-19, we're going to grab a lot of new players to the sport. So how do we bring all these players in? We already know we're going to bring in the white male. So I feel like everyone else is looking, how can we capture all these others that are into the sport currently? And then that easily extends out to what the limitations already are and always have been, and it's space, lack of funds to actually hit the road. You know, when I started, I was a scholarship athlete. I came out of college debt free. It allowed me to take a chance to be a professional disc golfer. You know, I've still self-funded my whole tour for 20 years, but I didn't have any debt, and I took the chance on myself. You know, and so we just do need to continually know that disc golf is an inclusionary game and utilize the images that we have. We have some very uniquely fit players right now. And a long time ago, the PDGA brought in the collared shirts. And so we look good out there. You know, I was playing the day when it was t-shirts and tie-dye and maybe the, you know, I'm looking good look. So we look professional. And I think it's going to skyrocket when it does get on like CBS Sports and we keep televising through Jomez, Smashbox, because the players look good. And it is true that professional players will breed fans and fans become recreational players, and then it just keeps going. So we need to be diligent in what we're doing.
I really love how I'm learning so much on this call, because I've had these conversations internally with myself and with my colleagues and friends. And there's so much that sticks out. But one of the most important things right now is something that Dez just said in regards to how we look and, you know, colored shirts and this and that. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, but collared shirts and how even Dustin said going to the country club and looking nice, all of that, I believe, is part of the systemic racism that has been a barrier for Black and people of color to be in the corporate environment. You know, having short hair tucked in, your beard, not everyone is like that, you know? Some people have big curly hair that takes them an hour to get ready, or, you know, whatever. It's just not collared shirts and certain things like that. So I think that's a really important issue that we need to embrace, in that people should be allowed to wear or dress however they want. I know there's a fine line in terms of appropriateness, but that whiteness that we've defined as appropriate is a big problem in a lot of different industries, especially the corporate one. And we are far from corporate. We all know that on this call. And the second point is in terms of accessibility. Putting disc golf on CBS is not, I don't think that's the path, the key to our success. It's a great opportunity that we couldn't pass up, but putting disc golf behind paywalls is the opposite of what we need to be doing, you know? Steve asked me, he's like, this was probably a year ago, Steve Hill, he said, hey dude, if you guys like just started your own website and charged people to watch tournament coverage, you'd make a killing. I said, maybe, but also we're doing a disservice to the sport, because now we're blocking people from accessing it. And that's kind of been our mission the entire time. Because yeah, we could have done that and we could be charging, because that's how proud we are of our work. But our work is meant to increase exposure, not increase exclusivity to it. So, you know, I think those 2 points kind of go hand in hand in terms of the accessibility, because we need to retain casual players so that they want to take the next step and become professionals. And that cost of retainment is like pretty high, you know. Now they need to subscribe to this and do that, and you know, a nice bag that all the pros wear is $300, and you know, the prices just keep increasing and increasing and increasing. And you know, that's just kind of how industry works at this point. But I believe it's within our capacity and capabilities to remove some of those barriers, and like Dustin and Dez saying, put in smaller, easier courses in more accessible locations.
Jeff, kind of coming back to your point about, you know, people who are mentioning that we're maybe creating a problem by bringing some of this stuff up, that, you know, disc golf's fine. Yeah, sure. A lot of white people play, but that doesn't mean that doesn't make it that it's bad. Obviously that's fine. But there's something to be said, kind of dovetailing off of what Juan is saying about being aspirational. You know, we can aspire to bring more people in. We can aspire to include a more diverse set of players. And I think some of that reaction, and I'm saying this as Steve Hill, not Steve Hill PDGA guy, just Steve Hill guy. So just to clarify here, I think some of that reaction comes from an area of maybe feeling defensive, of somehow seeing that, oh my gosh, you're saying that me being a white person in this sport now is bad somehow. And that's not the case. And I think that's something that has kind of come through a lot of what's going on in society right now, is that people are being forced to confront some of their privilege and some of their, you know, some of the comforts that they have, and that can be uncomfortable. And so I think there's a point in time. I think it's going to be an evolution. I think, yeah, there may be people who think, oh man, you guys are making a mountain out of a molehill. Disc golf is great. I go to my course and I get along with everybody who I want to. And that's awesome. And we love that. And we all know that. but there's a large segment of the population that clearly doesn't know that. And that doesn't mean that we can't try and bring them all in, because we always talk about how there's this awesome, amazing community in disc golf. Why don't we want that to get to more people? Why don't we want to do that kind of outreach? And it's not just because of the, maybe it's this moment that is spurring us to more action, but that doesn't mean that it isn't going to have long-term, impacts down the road. I think the really interesting thing that Juan brought up, though, and I honestly couldn't tell you where to begin with the solution to this, is at the same time, disc golf is on the professional level striving for more of this professionalism, this wanting to get on that same level as ball golf or as other sports, where, like it or not, a uniform or a certain look is expected. And that's a tough nut to crack. Like, do we have,
by who though?
Well, right, exactly. Expected by most of
white males
by the white population. Absolutely. Yeah. And so do we keep aspiring to that? Do we keep having a dress code? Do we do that? Or do we say, you know what, let's just be and do it? I mean, those are great discussions to have. I'm glad that you bring up stuff like that, Juan, because honestly, like from the perspective, again, that I'm coming from, I'm thinking, yeah, man, disc golf looks way more professional. Like we're on the come up because we're here in our collared shirts and looking, oh man, I like that look that Big Germ's got this weekend, where he's matching his tones and everything is really sharp, man. That looks good. But again, maybe that's not the perspective that needs to be had. Maybe we need to just, I would have never thought about that being a barrier. So thank you, man. That's the kind of stuff. That's why we're having these conversations. I love it.
I'll tell you, sorry, Des, just one quick thing. I'll tell you why I have this perspective. My parents worked their effing asses off, sorry, to put me through 12 years of private school. And why it cost so much for me to go to 12 years of private school was because of books and because of uniforms.
Yep.
One shirt was $50. One pair of Dickies pants or whatever I had to buy was $25. When I go to a disc golf course or I'm hanging out with my friends, they're wearing, cheap basketball shorts and, tank tops, so I get the perception we want to give off. But again, what is the goal of that perception if it's only feeding into the demographic that we already have? How are we going to grow if we keep aiming to please the demographic that already exists?
Okay. Great points, Juan. Completely agree. I'll tell you a little story just with way back. So when we were playing, I think I won in 2002, my first world championship, maybe in almost a tank top. I mean, it's probably not looking like super good, but man, I won, I became the world champion, and that's fantastic. And so as we were progressing through the sports, we brought on the PDGA brought on the sports loop, and, we were trying to tailor our image in. And, that just did not pan out. But I think what we're trying to do with the more tailored look is to look professional. Now, I completely agree with and I can say that I feel like we do look more sharp and professional. And that is what these events, and that's why they are A tiers, national tours, and majors that have the dress code, and the other events do not. So it does look better. And the goal of that was to bring more sponsors on and not so much maybe more players and maybe more fan base, because that is what you think of with uniforms. Now, back when I was sponsored by Innova, so this might have been early 2000s, they did their own kind of little marketing pool on all of us players. And the person who ended up being the most marketable from this other firm was actually Cam Todd. And he was definitely, for lack of a better term, we'll just say he was the black sheep of all of us at that point who was sponsored by Innova, not really because of his means or his measures, but he was the most tattooed up, and he had his very unique look. And that's just going to what your point said, is celebrating and allowing those players to celebrate. Drew Gibson looks phenomenal out there. Nico, when he gets his flair with different pants, Eric Oakley, you know, there are ways to still look sharp and bring in your personality, which I do hope we continue to highlight, because it looks good when they can do it. I totally get you with accessibility. So, you know, I was a 30-year-old, I was hitting the circuit, you know, as a 30-year-old who was taking a chance on herself. I shopped at Goodwill's to get my, you know, collared shirts and stuff when that movement, you know, was made by the PDGA. And that's how I was able to, you know, kind of fit the bill at that point in time. Because there wasn't sponsors, there's definitely was not enough money in it for women, and for me to actually continually fund what you were exactly saying was a limitation for me. I had to go, I was a Goodwill world champion, you know, because of these barriers that you put forward on there. I can say that I looked better when I won in 2005 and 6 because of those changes that the PDGA made. And I do feel like they made those changes to bring in more sponsorship and allow us to look more marketable, because at one point, and that's really just fashion, you know, 90s was grunge, you know, I still have some of my great, you know, flannels and stuff that I just can't get rid of. And, you know, in the early 2000s, we weren't that much sharp anyway, because, you know, materials weren't coming along. So when the whole thing hit with collared, it was really just collared shirts, because actually dry fits weren't even on the market then. We had to go back. And I'm saying we was because I've always been a participant as a player from the board of directors, and also have taken an opportunity to write my membership of the PDGA and take an active role in, you know, leading in these. I was part of the national tour planning committee back in the day. So, you know, we had to write in dry fits, because there was an outcry when dry fits came in, and that we could get away from collared shirts, because they were mostly collared, you know, cotton based. At one point in time, one of the pro tour guy took the little Izods and made 2 gators humping each other, you know, as a little not, I don't really agree with this dress code. But he wore his collared shirt. He just did it in a different way. I completely agree. We need to celebrate each other's personalities. I do think we look sharp and dress where I felt like that mode was coming from. And I think that's why actually in the C and B tiers also.
Yeah, and hey, listen, if you look at our website, our discs are more expensive than anywhere else. We sell full sublimated jerseys for $60. You know, our retail approach is what funds essentially what the money we're not intaking from paywalls and, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, people could definitely say, oh, Juan's being a hypocrite. He sells $60 shirts, you know, and they're dry fit jerseys or whatever. So I totally understand that. I just, I'm more interested in having the conversation, because I certainly make ton of assumptions as well, just like Steve said about Philo. I'd rather just bring it up and then have the conversation and then make a decision, or help inform people that are making those decisions. So,
well, in this conversation in general is a little bit eye-opening in the perspective of like what we're going through as a sport, you know, currently in that, you know, the CBS sports productions in the works. And Juan, I think you should get back to working on that right now. But
I'm actually working on it right now. Yeah.
but it just it reminds me like of, hey, you know, I actually was like grew up down the road from like a local country club, and so I played golf growing up, and it was, you know, it's very privileged to be able to do that. I think like it was a youth program that got me in. It was like $100 for the entire year for me, so they could just drop me up there as a kid. But in my own perspective, getting into disc golf, I love golf. Like I love the sport of, you start here and your objective is to get an object there, right? And I've thought a lot about the differences between disc golf and traditional ball golf. And I think now that we are, you know, considering as a sport and as leaders of the sport, you know, the path in terms of media and media driving a lot of the funding of the sport, in a lot of ways, or a lot of the revenue. There is a question of like, where do we want to take it? Because I've always admired, from the early discussions that I started having with Jonathan and Juan before, I was in this role, but I was involved in the game, that, very early it became clear that, hey, we're not looking to do anything with the paywall. We want it free and accessible. And I thought that was always, it's definitely something that always stuck out and resonated with me. And I think what I'm trying to get at is that, this ties into the dress code. It ties into like our advertising. It ties into, what are the decisions we're going to make in the future? And I think, just having the discussion, as many of us have said today, it opens up the communication to consider it and not to just kind of blindly follow conditioning of, hey, we're chasing down ball golf. Do we want to chase down, traditional golf in every way? Sure. There's money in it, right? But like, is that why we're doing this? And with disc golf being so accessible in so many ways, and us searching for barriers that are very much there, I think the question on my mind is, the potential of disc golf is so much bigger, than ball golf or traditional golf. Like, do we want to have advertisements of Mercedes and Rolex? Is that the people that, if we have those advertisements, that's think about the people who are going to be watching, right? And, even down to the dress code, I think it all kind of like ties together in this one topic of like, what is the direction of our sport? Is this like, this could certainly be, and we talked about this last time, as one of the topics on here, with the low barriers. Like, I come from background of skiing and snowboarding. There are like hundreds of barriers there, like location, money, demographics, dress code, like equipment, that like so many barriers. And when you look at disc golf, a lot of those barriers evaporate, while some are still there, but some have to be uncovered. So I guess let's go into this. I want to go around one more time, and just with closing thoughts, kind of with that in mind, like, these conversations are important. It brings up topics that are hard to talk about, but also the more we do it, the more comfortable we are communicating and keeping them kind of top of mind. So when those opportunities come up to say, is this decision inclusive? Is this decision, going to encourage diversity? It can be something that we're not, kind of crustily like breaking out. It's something that, we have attention to. It's something that we have communication about. It's something that we know what our colleagues think. So with those thoughts in mind, I guess I'll start with Steve, and just, I just want to thank you guys all for participating, and give you guys a chance to give some closing thoughts.
Yeah. And again, Jeff, thank you for hosting this, because, I think we all are learning different perspectives through this. And man, I honestly, if Juan wasn't so busy, I would just sit and call him up after this and talk to him more about this stuff, because truly, I mean, and I'm not trying to like be too effusive here, but we're very lucky in this sport to have someone with the amount of talent, and also just awareness and conscious that Juan has. So Juan, man, thank you for what you bring to the sport always, man, because it is better with you here. I think the closing thoughts on all of this is, I don't think there are closing thoughts. I think let's keep the conversation going, and let's keep having these kind of discussions and these kind of forums, and not lose the moment. I think that's really the biggest thing here, is that it can be easy to get complacent. It can be easy to see the things that are happening on the news, and then maybe the next news thing happens and we move on. And we all have to kind of effort this, and we have to work hard to keep some of these things in our awareness and in our consciousness, and hold each other accountable. Like I want PDGA members to hold us accountable to make sure that we stick to our strategic planning, and we continue this kind of outreach. And I want the professional players to hold each other accountable for representing themselves and representing the sport and everything like that. And I guess my final thought would be, the pro side, I think, can be so valuable to this outreach, and Jeff, what you're doing, and Dustin, what you're doing, and then obviously Dez, with your role at the PDGA. I mean, the opportunity we have to get players into schools, with clinics and the community connect, and getting more, going, like, really, disc golf is off the beaten path a lot of time, right? Like, how far is Clearwater out of Minneapolis? Like 45, 50 minutes, right? We need to, on that pro side of things, make sure we stay on that path sometimes in our processes and in our events. If we're in Clearwater, make sure we do something in Minneapolis. If we're in Emporia, make sure we're stopping in Kansas City and getting some pros into clinics or areas there. Maybe instead of having our, Des, we do a national tour clinic where people come to the course where the event is at and do a clinic. Maybe we need to rethink that and flip the script and take that away from the course and out to the closest school. I mean, there's just a lot that we can, I think, keep doing and keep identifying to work on this and improve. And so, without rambling much more, I just thank you again for having me and for hosting this. And, I look forward to us continuing the discussions on this, because it is very, very important. So thank you.
Forgot to unmute. Yeah, thanks, Steve. And we look forward to, and we know that you're part of the planning there for what the PDGA is working on in terms of increasing diversity and some initiatives there. So we appreciate that and look forward to that. Let's go to Dustin next. Thanks for being on, Dustin. Appreciate any closing thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think disc golf, in my opinion, sports pave their own path by being an individual sport. And I think if we move, just because golf is in our name doesn't mean we should strive to be just like the golf. And back in the 50s when the NBA was a thing, and it was mostly white players, and they had short shorts, they were deemed professional looking. And then once they started wearing baggy shorts, it stirred the pot, but then now they're deemed professional looking. The opinions will change if we let people just express themselves. And so if disc golf carves its own path and becomes a united sport of disc golf and not trying to be like something else or follow in a certain path. Sure, I always want our courses to follow in the golf way, creating, golf has a lot of good template as far as course design, and we can follow that aspect in disc golf, par fours, par fives, hazards, placement, and so on. Whereas image, though, I think we should really try to carve our own path. And, just because we wear collared shirts, it's because, these shirts don't come, or they do come uncollared, but they look nice. They're easy to throw in. People don't realize, these are performance wear. It's like playing in cotton. I don't understand how Dez could play in jean cutoff shorts and a cotton tank. That's hard to do, and so our gear is good. Our gear is nice. Let's allow people, like Juan said, to just express themselves and be out there playing golf. If they throw a good shot, doesn't matter what they look like. And if they're a respectable human, they're going to be liked. They're going to be followed. They're going to be a role model. So, finding the right people, finding the right idea of what disc golf is, it's its own thing. It's people don't realize how amazing disc golf is until they try it. And so just reiterating that and making sure that's the number one point. And as the top pros, I think the pros need to speak up more. They are the faces of the game, like it or not. Paul and Paige are the biggest names in disc golf. They should be letting their heart out to everybody, telling their story, giving everything to them. You know, they are the faces. So say it, you know, like Michael Jordan made the NBA so much bigger because he was allowed to express himself, you know, 92 Olympics, and show the world who he is and what basketball is. And it just made the whole sport bigger. So focus on the people who have put in the work and earned the titles that they have, you know, and allow them to speak and share their opinion on these things. I think the pros need to speak up more and do more as far as exposure to all the other diversities and cultures that we come across. And, you know, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I know a lot of people are trying to do. And that's what I think the Pro Tour is doing really good at, is allowing us to speak and tell people how we feel. Just because we all kind of look the same doesn't mean we all think alike. And, you know, disc golf will become what we all think it should be and where it can go if we allow it to be its own thing instead of trying to follow in the footsteps of the other sport that we're trying to follow. So thank you, Jeff, for putting these things together. These are the first steps of all that unraveling. So, you know, just more and more people involved.
Thanks, Dustin, and thanks for joining. And thanks to Zoe and the whole UPlay team for being involved and for teaching youth. Speaking of teaching youth, let's get it over to Dez and any closing thoughts.
Yeah, so my closing thoughts are, when we think about these, I see it, the disc golf for its, you know, whole history has been disc golf. And now we're to a point where we're almost, you know, we've been saying tipping point for quite a few years now, but let's just say we are at this. And I do feel like we're at a nice little apex where we are at almost like a divergence. So when I'm listening to everyone speak, we're running into a bit of issues of separating disc golf, the sport, and disc golf, the game. And these are what we're battling right now when we talk about how we're looking, how we're getting into schools. Are we bringing small courses into the community? The community, the disc golf in the schools that UPlay, Edge, disc golf, DGA has a great website. These are things that are the game of the sport, but we have always just been disc golf. And so we think of it, because we're players, as disc golf, the sport. Well, we're kind of at this point where we're almost, I feel like we're at the cusp of being beyond just the sport. And we have to separate the two, because we're getting cloudy in what we're trying to create as a message and as a goal to the end, because those two things contradict each other. The game is always going to be the game that is accessible, inclusionary, easy to play it with one $10, $15 disc. Now the sport itself is, you might have the $300 bag, the fancier outfits, you need to tour around. How are we going to address the problems of the sport? So I think when we're looking at these, and when I look at different means of bringing disc golf, I do try to say, where is my target audience? Or what is my target subject? Is it the sport or is it the game? If I'm putting on my youth and education hat, I'm thinking of it almost as a game, trying to create game players to like the sport. And the sport is the organization, the PDGA, which I represent as an employee and as a player. You know, I am part of a sport organization that can play a game of disc golf. When I go and play my recreational course in my hometown, I'm a gamer. You know, I'm playing a game. I'm not actually playing disc golf, the sport. It's just, there are two separate things to think about here. And we are at this point where we have enough split that we can address both of them. So when the National Tour Clinic Series, Jay and I were actually the creators of that way back. And then the PDGA took that over. I would love to revamp that program. I think there are many more opportunities for that. When we originally started that, it was to do what it just did. It created teachers like Dustin. It created teachers like Zoe. Jay and I were teachers already. It was our means of getting the touring players, being able to be in front of an audience, speak to people, to present the sport and play a game with them. And so we do need to relook at how we're thinking about our sport and our game, because we just got a lot of different fractions going on, and one solution is not going to address both of these entities. So when we progress forward, we just got to decide keep our subject in mind and stay on task of what the subject is. If we're talking about the sport, let's talk about how we can address the sport. And do we need to be like golf? No, we're not really like golf. I feel like we're more like skateboarding or something else. We have definitely more flair as a personal way of life. I mean, I'm a 20-year touring pro. You hardly can do that in other sports just with the longevity. You know, I can't do it now because we have such great youth that are in the sport they have great flavor. They have great flair out there. And we do want to showcase this. And so to pigeonhole everyone in a golf format, no. To take golf because it is in our name and utilize the recognition that golf has, that's a good thing. And so as disc golfers, we know who we are. You know, we got to stay true to ourselves, but you always, if you want to better yourself or better an organization or better a sport, then you learn to adapt and play the game to get the best outcome for what your subject is. So when we go forward and we address things, just keep those in mind of what your subject is. If someone wants to put a big revamp on a golf course and you're getting rid of baskets, come see me and I'll try to get rid of those decrepit baskets through the game, and we'll put them onto school campuses, and maybe we'll hook up with the Pro Tour and we'll do more community events, because there are good organizations that are bringing disc golf into schools. It's so easy to say disc golf is not into schools. It is. Disc golf just needs to get aware with the community so the moms and dads can play with their kids. That's the beauty of disc golf. When I did the recent article with the youth pro tour players, that has been, even I did last year, I took a big survey with the junior youth. The first thing they loved was family and playing with their friends. Fourth on the list was competition. And so those are the things that we got to remember when we're talking about community and youth. They're into the game. They will follow our really high profile players because money does breed money, and it's going to help us overall. If we can get our professional players making a living and they look good, that's going to help us fund putting it into the community, into the schools, which then gets more people playing disc golf on the whole. And then we just keep this wheel going. But right now we do have two separate cogs. We only had one to begin with when I first started it. And now I feel like we have two, and two on a cog machine is way better. But we just can't be cranking on one and expecting this other one to go, you know, so we got to get them both working in the right direction. That's
yeah, absolutely. And before we go to Juan for the close out, one thing I thought about when you're talking about other sports, recently I've been thinking about tennis as a great example of men and women touring together, same events, and having pretty much, they have equal pay, equal participation. So that's a good professional example. But that said, thank you, Des. Really appreciate those thoughts. Thanks for joining.
Back with women's tennis, they actually they split off because they were not getting recognized for their potential so they actually left the tour, and the tour came back to them, you know, so yes.
I had to go through it. Yeah.
Right. And that is where we're always at, you know, so I think you originally said, like, do we always have to lead for women or minorities to stand up for themselves? You know what? We should all stand up for ourselves, whether it be white men or white women or anybody else in between all of those whitenesses that we keep feeling like is out there. So yes, we all have to just stand up for ourselves in our own entities, because in the end, when we're standing up for ourselves and what we love, we're going to go somewhere.
Yeah. And one thing we're doing with women's payouts this year at every Pro Tour event is adding 10% of the overall payout per percentages and shifting it to the women's payout for the added cash. So that's something we're trying in terms of increasing, you know, the payout and the competition side. You know, we know there's a couple sides, but thank you again, Des. And let's kick it over to Juan. And thanks for joining us again, Juan. And we'd love to hear any closing thoughts that you may have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, Dez, Dustin, Zoe, Steve. I think I told you either right before, Jeff, when you became CEO, that I had a lot of trust in you. I don't know why, but I was just like, I trust you, like, let's do this. And I think it's because of your willingness to listen. not every decision you make is going to be great, but like you send out surveys, you ask questions, you host things like this. And I think that is extremely important because it comes with your privilege in terms of who you are in the industry, but also who you are as a person. And I've really reflected on that quite a bit in terms of my privilege. When Jonathan and asked me to partner with him for Jomez, it really kind of scared me. But then I was like, no, dude, like this is my privilege. This is my opportunity to be a contributing person in a sport in a major way. Before, my contributions in my career were designing posters for movies or Netflix, and I was just a little small piece of the pie, pretty much at the very end. And when Jonathan asked me, it just blew my mind. And I told him pretty much no, like, you're crazy. I don't want to do that. That's too much responsibility. But having people like you and Dez and just people willing to do it and do it in the best way they can, I think it reflects the larger part of our sport. And it really does give me a lot of confidence that we're going to head it in a direction that doesn't limit itself. And I feel like that's really important because disc golf kind of changed my life in so many ways, and I want other people to experience that. And I'm an avid junkie of consuming sports. I watch rugby, I watch surfing, I watch skateboarding. Name a sport or some random weirdo competition thing on YouTube, and I pretty much watch it. So I totally get with what Dez is saying in terms of, men seem to have a more competitive nature. I don't know if that's true of all men, probably not, but I certainly, plug into that outlet of just like everything is a competition all the time, So disc golf really gave me a place to put all that energy into. So I'm just really thankful to be a part of the conversation and really push each other, like Steve is saying, to be held accountable, but also to keep myself accountable of like, why am I here? What am I contributing? And how will this help someone else come and take my job, pretty much, like if Paul Macbeth isn't inspiring people to be better than Paul Macbeth, he's pretty much just wasting his time, and that's something I get from him. He's like, dude, I want to do what I'm doing so that someone can shatter my records, whoever it is, no matter their color or whatever. So I do take a lot of inspiration from everyone here and all of our players, and like you just got to keep going, got to keep trying stuff. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody again for participating in our second Diversity in Disc Golf Forum. I think, just summing it up, we're all in process of figuring out, how best move forward on this topic and how to grow the sport in a diverse, inclusive way for all people of color and socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's because we all believe in the sport so much. It's so accessible in so many ways. We want to make it accessible in every way. We love being outside. We love the flight of the disc, and there's something inspirational about that really unifies us all and brings us all together in some way we can't really explain. So, I just really thankful for all of your time, all of your efforts in the sport. And Steve has one final thought, maybe.
Just before we go, Jeff, I wanted to make sure, we recognize too what the Disc Golf Pro Tour is doing with their event this weekend in honoring George Floyd and raising money for the NAACP. I think it's incredibly moving, incredibly powerful, and just you guys using your platform for that. I don't think we'd addressed it yet, and I figure if there's a couple people watching here who might want to know that and know where to get involved, I didn't want to leave before we said something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my closing thought as well.
No, I stole it from you. Sorry.
It's okay. I have two closing thoughts. One is that, there is a PDGA election going on. So, if you want to try to dig in and identify, the people that, maybe reflect diversity in any way, shape, or form, or at least, recognize it and, get on board with all the thoughts and ideas that we're sharing here, vote for those folks. Also, yeah, as Steve mentioned, we are, here in just 40 minutes outside of Minneapolis, and we're about to host the first ever Preserve Championship. And right after we announced it, George Floyd was murdered, and the protests across Minneapolis and then the country, started. And, we felt that we had to listen, take our time to figure it out. But, the Pro Tour is proud to dedicate the events to the memory of George Floyd. And in doing so, we do have a goal of $2,500 funds being raised. And you can, I think we have the link in our description here, but if not, it's definitely on our social media accounts and it's right on our website. But you can donate, and if we don't get there, we'll donate the rest. But we'll definitely. We originally did make a donation, and we feel like that it's the right organization at this time, and we hope that you guys join us in just having the tough conversations, bringing the ideas of diversity, inclusion, and acceptance, the denunciation of racism in all forms across the world, and kind of taking that into your everyday lives and spreading it throughout our game. And again, last thing is thank you guys all for participating here. And we look forward here at the Disc Golf Pro Tour to our next one. And we plan on keeping it up and talking about it. And as we've heard here tonight, we hope that in its own way, just the communication and the spotlight on what the spirit of the game is, which is inclusion and just love for the sport and for each other, shines through. So that said, thank you guys all again. We're looking forward to the Preserve Championship, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.